Shalom and welcome to the Jewish Geography Podcast. I'm your host, Rabbi Eitan Levy. Many people, myself included, are attracted to Orthodox Judaism because of the certainty it seems to give us about some of the big life, the universe, and everything sorts of questions. But some of my co-religionists try to extend our theological and revelation-based certainty to everything, sometimes with harmful or even dire consequences. Today, I want to talk about what, according to Orthodox Judaism, we know and what we don't. What are articles of faith, and what is stuff some guy said that spread around the Jewish world like crazy before anybody could stop and ask if we really knew it was true? Where is the line between knowledge and hope, certainty and doubt within a believing Orthodox Jewish framework? Keep listening to hear my take on it. Now on with the show. For those of you who don't know, and I was recently reminded that there are such people, Chabad is a group of Hasidim, Jewish mystical pietists, you could say, who originated in the town of Lubavitch in White Russia. They have a highly developed system of mystical Jewish practice, meditation, halakha, that's Jewish law, and a total worldview, or philosophy if you prefer. Their views are really pretty unique, some might say idiosyncratic, within the Orthodox Jewish world, but are accepted as being fully part of the Orthodox world, at least by almost everybody. In the 1940s, the sixth Rebbe, the spiritual leader of Habad, fled the Nazis and landed in Brooklyn, where he began to rebuild a religious community and educational institutions, which were almost entirely wiped out by the Holocaust. When the sixth Rebbe of Chabad died, his son-in-law, Rabbi Schneerson, took over as the seventh, and as it turned out, final Rebbe of Chabad. Along with his deep knowledge of Torah and Halakha, as well as the mystic secrets of Judaism and Chabad Hasidus, he was a great organizer and inspirational leader. His saintliness was recognized by people from all parts of the Jewish world and well beyond it. When our secular prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was representative of Israel at the UN, his first stop on U.S. soil was to visit the Rebbe, to get advice and draw strength before entering the lion's den. And that level of respect was not unusual to be showed to Rabbi Schneerson by world leaders. He also reoriented Chabad somewhat away from its traditional focus on inward mystical devotions toward outreach and bringing traditional Judaism, or Yiddishkeit, to the masses of non-religious and assimilated Jews. Chabad has played a central role in the revitalization of Orthodox Jewry in the United States after the Holocaust. They train their young people to, as an ideal, go to the most far-flung corners of the earth wherever there is one Jew who might benefit from their presence and selflessly serve the Jewish people, and by that means God. And that's heroic enough to get me singing their praises. The fact that anywhere I go in the world, I know I can find a Chabad emissary, have a Shabbat meal, a place to pray, a safe space, and a warm welcome, and that still would be true even if I was not religious. But that's not all. Almost every Jew from the former Soviet Union who came out at the end of the Cold War with some knowledge of Judaism was because of Chabad. They were the only Jewish organization that made meaningful and sustained efforts to sneak Jewish necessities like prayer books and tefillin through the Iron Curtain, at serious risk to life and limb. They are the ones who secretly dug mikvahs in the cellars of Moscow apartment buildings so that Jewish families could maintain the purity laws if they so chose. Chabad has truly done heroic things for the Jewish people, and they continue to do so. But there is a problem. A subset of Chabad devotees, I don't know what percentage, called Chabadniks, that's general Chabad devotees are called Chabadniks, not this subgroup, thought that the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, was the Messiah. And some of them keep believing that now, years after his death. And for many people in my more modern Orthodox community, this puts them beyond the pale of Orthodoxy or even of Judaism in general. Now, I have to look at people who make these sorts of statements about Chabad with some puzzlement, a bit of anger, and a lot of concern, honestly. The puzzlement and anger are because of the outright denigration of a group of traditional, committed, Jewish law-following Jews, especially for a group that does uniquely and without recompense so much good for the Jewish people. But I also have concern because people seem to feel very certain about a lot of things that Judaism really doesn't make definitive statements about. So let's look at the problem. The problem is that, apparently, many Chabadniks believe the Rebbe is the Messiah, and thus that implies he will somehow come back and fulfill the duties the Messiah is supposed to fulfill. Let's break down what's wrong with this and what is not wrong with this from a traditional Jewish perspective. For one thing, we have a long history of false messiahs in Judaism, and they generally have led to trouble, from Jesus of Nazareth to Shabtai Tzvi, and many more in between. And for many observant Jews, the similarity of the idea of a resurrected Messiah to the ideas of Christianity is what puts this group beyond the pale. But do Jewish sources really give us a precise timetable for how and when the Messiah is supposed to come, or what it's supposed to look like, whether he's supposed to have to come once like a normal person, riding on a donkey, all these sorts of things that people talk about? And the answer really is no. People cite prophecies that they claim can, quote, only be read one way, when in fact they are vague and dramatically open to interpretation. And then they will answer what I'm saying now by quoting rabbinic sayings from the Talmud that support their specific reading, ignoring the other rabbinic sayings which contradict their reading, which ignores the fact that all these interpretations are opinions and guesses, or perhaps deep spiritual teachings that are not really even trying to precisely predict the future, and in any case are not binding on a Jew to believe according to Jewish law, but are rather ideas and thoughts about the future. Now, I don't believe that the Messiah is going to be killed or die and then later be resurrected. I don't see any reason why God would make things happen that way, but that's really not an essential part of my belief system as an Orthodox Jew. I really could not care less whether he's been here before when he comes, builds the temple, and ushers in an era of universal peace and the revelation of God to all of humanity, where his temple in Jerusalem will be a house of prayer for all nations, and we will beat our swords into plowshares. Really, I couldn't care less what he looks like, whether he's been here before. I also don't care if he wears a funny hat while he does it. So what is the problem with Christianity from a Jewish perspective? It's not how or when the Messiah is supposed to come. We really don't know a lot of details about that. All we really know as articles of faith is what he's supposed to accomplish. There are at least 3 problems. One, the lesser of the two, is that they, Christians, have decided a person is the Messiah for sure, when he has failed to accomplish all those goals I mentioned a minute ago. That seems to be a failing that some Chabad messianists share. Maybe sorta. But the real problems are the deification of a human being, which Judaism considers a form of idolatry, and the idea that the Torah has been in some way abrogated so that Jews no longer need to keep all the commandments, and Gentiles can take part in the Jewish covenant with God without converting and taking on the commandments. Those are the 2 red lines: worshiping a human being and not following Jewish law. Chabad does neither of those things. It doesn't have either of those failings, and they also do a whole lot of good in the world, according to a sort of Orthodox Jewish lens of looking at things. Given all that, I'm happy to overlook their theological quirks and disturbed at some of my fellow Orthodox Jews' eagerness to throw them off the boat. As a believing Orthodox Jew, I have to know what my red lines are. That's important, and it's real, and trust me, there are plenty of them. But it's also important not to create them where none exist, especially when the consequences are so potentially destructive to the Jewish people and, in my opinion, therefore to the world. Orthodox Jews believe in an afterlife because it's a theological necessity to do so. It's a place where a good and just God will make right all the injustices of this world. But beyond that, what do we know for sure? To explore this question, Daniela is here to read a letter to Josep from her blog at letterstojosep.com. That's Josep, no H at the end, .com, titled The Vagaries of the Jewish Afterlife. Now here's Daniela.
A number of years ago, you shared a highly amusing little Rowan Atkinson routine with me where he pretends to be the devil, welcoming all the new arrivals to hell. He goes through the various groups of people and at one point says,
"Finally, Christians. Ah, yes, I'm sorry. I'm afraid the Jews were right." If you could come down here.
I responded that Eitan and I had laughed our heads off at it, and then, of course, if the Jews were indeed right, the whole thing would be set up very differently and their term of stay in hell would only last a year, but I don't expect Rowan Atkinson to know that. You asked me to explain, and I responded, I never told you about the Jewish concepts of the afterlife? Probably because they are vague, disputed, and overall a rather unimportant aspect of Judaism, and proceeded to give a brief overview of the concepts of the Jewish afterlife with which I'm most familiar by comparing it to the Christian concepts and pointing out the differences. Today, I'm going to go more in depth. From a theological perspective, the idea of the existence of an afterlife is a very simple answer to the problem of divine justice. It explains how good people can suffer in this world by saying that justice will be served after we die. That's why it's such a crucial part of every religion. In Judaism, however, there's a notable lack of focus on the afterlife. I've always said that it's because Judaism is much more focused on this world, what to do in it, and how to improve it, than on the next world. In the Mishnah, in Ethics of the Fathers, it says, "Be not like a servant who serves his master in order to receive a reward, but rather like a servant who serves his master unconditionally." Why would a servant serve his master unconditionally? Out of love, right? Love and the sense that the service itself is the reward, and in cases where that doesn't feel true, the belief that the master has one's best interests at heart, and knows best even when the servant doesn't understand. Eitan pointed out to me recently that we have so many other, more pressing things to focus on, that the afterlife is sort of an afterthought for us. Unlike its numerous mentions in the Christian Bible and in the Quran, an afterlife is only very vaguely referred to throughout the Bible, and never in detail. So, do we believe in an afterlife? Yes, we do. For Jewish philosophers, too, it serves as an answer to the question of divine justice. Not the only one, but it's part of explaining how the world is more complex than what we see in front of us. However, unlike in Christianity and Islam, the details of what it is, what it looks like, etc., are not part of our belief system, and therefore are basically a topic of discussion and dispute rather than doctrine. So you'll find a very wide variety of opinions on it in rabbinical literature. If you ask an observant Jew about his beliefs regarding the afterlife, he'll probably answer something like what I will describe below. These are the most mainstream views of it that exist in Torah observant Judaism. But again, it's important to emphasize that this is mostly speculation. The most accurate answer to the question of what the afterlife is, according to Judaism, is we don't know. Now, let's talk about how to kosher that saucepan. We have two ways to refer to our version of heaven: Olam Haba, the world to come, and Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. The latter of those implies a return to our pre-Adam sin state of simplicity and oneness with God. But unlike other religions that describe in great detail the pleasures that await a righteous person in heaven, Judaism is very vague on this. In our prayer liturgy for the dead, we refer to basking in God's light or sitting near his throne. We talk about one's soul being bound in the bond of life. I'm sure the Kabbalah has a lot to say about it, but Kabbalistic thought is not generally mainstream. Basically, we don't really know what it is. All we know is that it's good, some kind of eternal peace, and we talk about there being some kind of hierarchy according to the spiritual level one achieved during his lifetime. So, how do we get to Olam Haba? This is a very Christian question. A better question in Judaism is, how do we not get to Olam Haba? The general assumption, and not just with Jews, but with every human being, is that he or she will take part in Olam Haba. It may involve a few steps to get there, upon which we'll elaborate in a moment. You have to do something specifically wrong, not to get there. In the Torah, there are a few commandments that list the punishment for transgressing them as karet. It is the harshest punishment in the Torah, even harsher than death. No one really knows what karet is, but the root kaf resh taf generally means cut off, and a common interpretation of the term is that it means being cut off from the physical and spiritual world, meaning that when a person dies, he or she simply ceases to exist. The soul is destroyed and does not live on. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. They do have monopoly in Catalonia, right? Gehenna. So this is the closest thing we have to hell, but really, if we're comparing to Christian theology, it's more like what y'all call purgatory. You see, in Christianity, hell is permanent. If you're a sinner and or you don't accept Jesus, you're condemned to an eternity of suffering, fire and brimstone, etc. That's what awaits me according to your religion. Thanks a bunch. In Judaism, this is not so. Gehenna is a stage in a process of spiritual purification or cleansing. That process actually begins with the physical world, or at least the parts of the process we are aware of. We see life as an opportunity to purify and refine our souls by making the right choices in this life. If we have not managed to do so in this life, there are two possibilities, at least according to my own beliefs: Ganon and reincarnation, which we'll get to in a moment. So again, no one really knows what Ganon is or what exactly happens there, but the most common explanation I've heard is that it's a state of remorse and regret for not living up to your full potential. It appears to be a state of understanding why the things you did were wrong, how they affected you and those around you, and what you could have done and been versus what you did and were, and the subsequent profound regret that comes with that. Our sources say that this process lasts as long as that individual soul needs, which at the very most is a year. That's why we recite Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, for a year after the death of a parent. Well, actually, we recite it only for 11 months, under the belief that no one could possibly be wicked enough to deserve the full 12 months. When the process is complete and the soul is cleansed, it then moves on to Olam Haba. In essence, Gehinnom is actually not really a different place than Olam Haba, but part of it. Jew in the City, an internet personality who, by the way, is also a great resource for people looking to learn about the basic concepts of Judaism, has a cute video explaining how it's like the difference between attending a symphony as someone who has a deep appreciation for music and understanding of it, versus attending the same symphony as someone who hates classical music and has never even bothered to learn to appreciate it. For the first person, it's heaven. For the second, it's hell. Gehinnom in this allegory is the place where at first the music is torture, but then you slowly learn to enjoy and appreciate it, and then it becomes heaven for you. Reincarnation. Not all Jews believe in reincarnation. As with all this stuff, it's opinion, not doctrine, and reincarnation even more so than the other things. Personally, as you know, I do believe in reincarnation. I believe it is another way to cleanse souls that, for whatever reason God decides, need to be purified this way, and not through Gehinnom. We come back to this world and live another life, completing whatever lessons we need to learn or achievements we needed to accomplish in the previous lifetime but did not. Resurrection of the dead. This concept is one that is specifically referred to in our scriptures. It's not really about the afterlife, but about the Messianic era. Our tradition teaches that when the Messiah comes, the righteous dead will come back to life to experience and take part in the redemption of the world. Most of our sages interpret this as being 100% literal. Most Jewish cemeteries all over the world are arranged with the graves facing Jerusalem, with the idea that when the dead are resurrected, they can just climb on out of the grave and conveniently find themselves facing the right direction. They may be a little disappointed to discover that the gates are locked. Obviously, this is a bit of a stretch for a rationalist like myself. I tend to prefer to take this as being metaphorical. After all, no one actually knows what the Messianic age will look like either. In fact, the Messianic age is also referred to as Olam Haba in many sources, so there seems to be some idea there about the joining of the physical and spiritual world into one, and that makes a little more sense to me. So now about the devil. So actually, the concept of Satan in Judaism has nothing at all to do with the afterlife, but I'm bringing it up here to fully address Rowan Atkinson's routine. The word Satan, Satan, means adversary, and in Christian thought, the devil is kind of God's enemy, in that he tries to attract people to sin and therefore, I suppose, is appointed master of hell, which is where sinners go. In Christian thought, the devil is a sort of independent force that works against God. In Jewish thought, Satan is a spiritual entity that works for God and is subordinate to him. He, or it, is an adversary in that he is the prosecutor against us in the heavenly court. This is all allegorical. He makes claims against us and is harsh on us, but he still works for the judge and for justice. In a sense, Satan is kind of an externalized conception of the evil inclination, Yetzer Hara, the part of the human nature that attracts him to sin. In summary, here's hoping that the Jews are indeed right on this one.
So I was hoping to add a bit more content to this episode, but sorry to say that having sick kids home all week and the vagaries of the weather vetoed that idea, so that's all for this week's episode of Jewish Geography. To subscribe or listen to all past episodes, go to rabbieitan.com, that's RABBIEITAN.com, and go to the podcast page or search for Jewish Geography wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find information about yours truly and touring in Israel on my website, rabbiyotan.com. The site has just been completely redesigned, so please check it out. I'll be back next week with another episode of Jewish Geography. In the meantime, thank you for listening and have a great week.